All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fourth episode of the From Los Angeles to Seattle podcast with Judith Hope. I'm Judith Hope, and I'm super excited that you all are here today. We're going to be talking about something that a lot of you have probably experienced, and that is a holiday with family members where sometimes things can be a little awkward. Because we all have those awkward experiences with family members, and the more we kind of dig into that, right, and this type of space that we're in now, a spiritual community space, we understand a lot of that, maybe coming from either past life, karmic lessons, things like that, right? And so that's what we're going to be talking about today in this episode is Thanksgiving. I spent Thanksgiving in East Texas with my family, and now I am actually on the road headed to Seattle. But it's been a few days since Thanksgiving, so I felt like, hey, like let's talk about it. We're going to be going into Christmas soon, so I think there's a lot of lessons and learnings from some of the experiences that I'm going to be talking about today that can be used for the upcoming holiday season, right? Because we're right now in the middle of it, in the thick of it. But before we get started on that, I do want to note that if you haven't done so already, please hit like and subscribe. Okay, so for the most part, I had a really good Thanksgiving experience. Had a great time, wonderful time spending time with my family and friends. But I did have, one family member that came up to me and was telling me all the reasons that people love Trump. And I will just say, right off the bat, from my personal human perspective, I've never been the biggest fan of this guy, right? And I understand what's happening on the galactic level with him, like what his soul mission is and what he's here to do to kind of dismantle some of these government systems that have been in place that are hurting people. And I'm glad he's doing that. I just don't always like the way he's going about it and the types of thing he says and does, the wounds, the collective wounds that he is playing upon in order to get in power and be able to do these things. Like the way he goes about things, I've never really supported. And I don't really like him, as a leader, the way he, is treating people, specifically immigrants, things like that right now. So when I go, into a family gathering, someone is just, telling me all the, the reasons that people like him, it can be a bit frustrating, right? And I've kind of gotten to the point, with my family, I'm from a very conservative state and I've always been very liberal politically. I just don't want to get into big arguments with people. And there have been times where I felt like I needed to say something because I really felt like they weren't understanding something or they were speaking from a place of hurt or misinformation. And I needed to let them, know. But for the most part, I've one of my things in this lifetime that I've really had to learn with coming from Texas and being more of a liberal individual is how to love people and how to be family to support, each other when we do have very differing political and even spiritual and religious beliefs. So that's been a big lesson for me. And I think the thing about it sometimes is that you don't know what their soul has planned for the lifetime, what they're trying to learn or accomplish in this lifetime that is leading them to say certain things or behave in certain ways. It's kind of the root of what is causing, certain belief systems or behaviors in people. And sometimes a lifetime needs to play out a certain way in order for a soul to learn a lesson. And sometimes that person almost has to fail or has to go through a hard time or has to learn a lesson the hard way in order for their soul over multiple lifetimes to ascend and grow. And sometimes we don't see that growth or that ascension in the current lifetime. So if you have current like family members that can be difficult or you disagree with or you don't understand why they're not changing their behavior, I think this could be a good one for you to listen to. And I think the best way for me to illustrate this point is to actually to share one of the past lives that my soul had on planet Earth in the past. And this lifetime I actually found out about because I did a group past life regression a few months ago. And so this is not me going into my own Akashic records and, understanding about the past life, but I was actually led through this by a past life regressionist in a group setting. All right. So I went to this event. He put us under this hypnosis. I believe it was QHHT, which is by Dolores Cannon, that he put us under. And it was very like, as a group hypnosis. So it wasn't like people were truly like unconscious and, speaking as the past life, which is what like an individual QHHT session would be like. You can read about that in Dolores Cannon books. There's transcripts from those sessions if you are interested in that. And other, numerous authors have now also, published books that are written in that past life, hypnosis regression style as well. So there's a lot out there. But this, we were in like a lower level of hypnosis, so it's still conscious. It's more similar to kind of how I do my Akashic clearing sessions. I don't put people under hypnosis because I'm not a trained hypnotist, but I do calibrate them up to the Akashic records where it's more easy for them to receive intuitive messages as we go through the clearing. So very similar to like, I believe it would be like if a hypnotist put someone in like an alpha state, which is like the first like state of hypnosis where you're not unconscious, would be my understanding. So that's how this past life came through. But basically, in this past life, like I mentioned, it was on planet Earth. I was a male in that lifetime, a man. I can say man because we're on Earth. Man and woman, right? Sometimes aliens are not man and woman. They're a male alien or a female alien or a, alien who's a bit of, both female and male energy, more an androgynous alien, right? But this was on Earth, so go ahead and use the terminology man. And so this dude, he was living, I feel like he was living in British Empire type of role. So I don't know that he was in England. He may have been like in like colonies somewhere. I'm not sure exactly where, but he was under rule of like the British Empire at the point where they were like still putting people who owed debts in prisons, right? And so, and that's important later on in the story of this man. So this guy, his father passed away when he was like young, maybe like a teenager, leaving him and his mom, and he had a younger brother, leaving them, without a father, a breadwinner, right? Because this was at the time, right, where it's more traditional and men are still the breadwinner, take head of the household, take, responsibility for the family type of social situation. And so he, being the oldest brother, he kind of had to take responsibility of like, I have to step up, make sure my mom and my brother are taken care of. And this guy, just right off the bat, he's the kind of guy that doesn't like large systems of control, such as like the government, what we'd have to say is like large corporations, like organizations, right? That are like these big, massive things that have systems in place and they don't always treat people the best, right? And I can definitely relate. Like this is something that is so I don't particularly always like seeing this, either, which is when I was working in a corporation, I struggled seeing this type of stuff wherein, people weren't treated well by these large organizations that I was auditing. And kind of getting to see it a little bit behind the scenes too makes it worse. So me and this guy, I really resonate, with that part of him. And this guy definitely was the kind of guy who would fight for what he thought was right? If he saw people being mistreated or seeing things that weren't done ethically, he would definitely fight for it. And when he, got to be the age, he, had this girlfriend that they had like this beautiful romance and he really loved her. They had a good relationship. And, they weren't at this point, they were not married. And she was working as some kind of like barmaid or waitress at like a tavern or a pub. And the owner of the pub was this like older man, and he basically let his customers be very disrespectful towards the women who were like waitressing there, like, maybe inappropriate name calling, inappropriate like flirty, I put, like air tags on, but, touches that maybe were unwanted by the employees, right? And so this guy, his girlfriend was one of the waitresses working there. So he, witnessed the way she and her coworkers were treated by like the male customers of the bar. And he didn't like it. And he had some type of relationship, or he knew the bar owner, and at one point, he got to the point he was fighting with the bar owner about it, and it became like a physical like fight because he was not happy with the way he was basically running his business, letting his female employees be treated. And this past life of mine ended up getting kicked out of the bar, because he's physically fighting, starting a fight with the bar owner. So yeah, he's gonna get kicked out of the bar, right? And so he ended up getting married to this girlfriend, having kids. They had this family. They had some type of like farm, and like I mentioned earlier, like he has now his kids, but he also has his mom that he was taking care of, right? And he did have the younger brother. So hopefully at some point the younger brother became of age and he could work and help support and do things like that too. But this guy had a lot of people relying on him, right? He had his own family, but then because his, dad had passed, he had to think about, his mom and his siblings as well. But this guy was a fighter, right? And so he did something at some point, and it felt like something like he didn't pay his taxes or comply with some type of government regulation because he probably thought it wasn't ethical or wasn't right or wasn't fair, or wasn't treating people well. And so he was going to stick it to the man. He was going to say, I'm not going to do this. This isn't right. Like, you're not going to treat me this way. You're not going to treat my family this way. Like, I'm not doing it, right? So that very hard, like, line in the sand, non-compliance. But like I mentioned earlier, this guy was living under like British rule, like British Empire rule. It was at a point in time where they were basically putting like debtors into prison, right? Like that time where because now if you don't do things like pay your taxes, like you don't go to prison typically, right? I mean, you can, I think, right? You can, but a lot of people aren't paying their taxes on time and things like that. And there's not hard labor camps. Like, and if you don't pay your debts, like you don't go to a hard labor camp, right? So it's just like a different time back then. And he did something or other where the government officials came to the farm one day. They got him, they took him, and they put him in this hard labor camp. And he lived there for a few years. And when we went to the point in the regression where we showed the past life, they're passing, they're going to the other side. He did die in the hard labor camp, and he kind of, as he was passing away, he had this moment where he kind of thought about his life and, everything that had happened, and kind of understood, what him fighting constantly, whether it's the government or people in charge of a bar or, people who had the power and the control, how it kind of ended up for him, right? And what it happened, with his life. And so the last thing in the regression is to kind of understand what was the purpose of this lifetime? Like, what did he learn from this lifetime? And the big message that came through there was that this is what it's like to learn what it feels like to die fighting, right? So that was the purpose of this lifetime, to learn what it feels like to die fighting. And so in order for the soul to learn that, he could not have learned his lessons and realize, okay, like, yeah, it sucks, but I've got to comply with this regulation. I've got to pay these taxes. I've got to do whatever it was. He had to learn what it feels like to put that hard line in the sand and say, no, I'm not going to do this, and then suffer the consequences, right? And so in that lifetime, in order for him to learn that lesson, his wife, his mom, his brother, his friends, his children, no matter what they said or did, in order for him to learn that lesson, he had to not listen to them and not change, right? So as hard as that is to think about from the human perspective, I don't think any of these important people in his life could have really changed him in the way that would have made a difference where they wanted. I'm sure he's a good person and they want to see him learn and do better, but in order for him to learn that lesson, like, he really couldn't have changed, or he wouldn't if he had changed, he wouldn't have really learned that lesson. He had to be hard-headed and strong and stubborn about it. And so when I put myself in the shoes of his loved ones, how horrible would that be? someone you care about so much, your dad or your husband or your son, refusing to see reason, being so stubborn that he gets taken to a hard labor camp and passes away, right? But ultimately, that was the soul's plan for this lifetime, to learn that, right? And so now me, I'm the same soul. I'm reincarnated on the same planet. And I've always been someone who is like, yeah, it sucks that they're treating people this way. Like, I see things all the time, whether it's large corporations or governments or religious leaders or whoever's in power. And I'm like, that's wrong. They shouldn't be doing that. But I also understand, in order to live a healthy and happy life, and in order to accomplish my soul mission and the things I'm going to do on this planet, I'm going to have to comply with these laws and these regulations that are in place. And of course, I believe in advocating for change, right? And we can all do our part as individuals to advocate for change, if that's anything like voting or becoming involved in local politics, or if you're a journalist writing a journalistic article about it, or nowadays anyone can be a journalist by making a TikTok or a video on Instagram or YouTube or whatever, right? Those things are good things, but ultimately, like, if you don't pay your taxes, like, it's going to come back to bite you in the butt, right? Like, and I've always known that, and I've always just been like, look, like, I got to pay for this, I got to do, it's just going to be better for me if I go ahead and I take care of this up front. And I just kind of know that, right? And the reason I know that is because I had this whole other lifetime where I saw the devastation it caused me, it caused my family members, the people I loved and cared about, when I didn't do that, right? And so to bring it back to my point is that we don't know what lifetimes the souls of our loved ones are trying to learn, right? And we cannot interrupt that process if it is not divinely guided for us to interrupt it. If this person is really supposed to learn a lesson the hard way, right? If they're really supposed to learn a lesson about what it feels like to literally die, pass away, fighting, the only way they can learn that is to learn it the hard way, right? And so I think for me, accepting this has been able to, when I see certain people that I care about in these situations where they're struggling, right? And it's like, I could help them, like, I could help them, or I could help them change, like, sometimes I've just had to be like, you know what, maybe it's not in the divine plan for me to do that, right? Because maybe their soul's supposed to learn something, right? And maybe my soul is supposed to learn something too by not helping. And it's interesting because I think it's kind of a sobering point, right? And despite this, I still believe in my heart that we all have the capacity to change and to do better. And I think that every lifetime has multiple timelines. So there's going to be some timelines where the person's in a higher frequency and they're learning lessons a certain way. And there's going to be times when someone's in a lower frequency, timelines where they're in a lower frequency and they're learning lessons the hard way. So despite this sobering kind of lesson I'm talking about, I still have this sense of like, hey, I'm not going to say they're not going to change, or that they're not going to see reason, or that they're not going to, change their behaviors or their habits and things like that, right? I'm not going to say that they're not going to do that because I don't know. But at the same time, if they don't, then I have to know it's for the highest good of their soul and their evolution, right? Because my understanding is that we don't just have this one lifetime to live. Like, this lifetime is a blip. It's a lesson in the evolution of our soul. And even when a person does have to have a lifetime where they have to learn a lesson the hard way, they're going to come back and they're going to have another lifetime where they are able to grow and expand, right? And so if you have this type of situation in your life with a family member, a friend, a loved one, just know that whatever's happening is going to be, for the highest good ultimately. And there's only so much we can control, right? So just take some time, think about it, chew on it. If you have any questions about it, message below, because I think it's an interesting topic and one that deserves a lot of, dialogue and conversation. So that that was the fun topic. The not so fun topic I want to talk about today. I actually have some more interesting stuff I want to talk about in relation to Thanksgiving. But before I do that, I do want to let you know I have some freebies linked below. I have a third eye activation meditation. So if you are wanting to open up your third eye, expand your psychic ability, start channeling messages yourself, I definitely recommend this. It's a really quick meditation, about 8.5 minutes long. You download it and you can kind of listen to it like on your break, right? Like your lunch break, or like before you go to bed, or when you wake up, and you actually go into different versions of yourself. So a version of you when you're a baby or when you're 5 years old, and your third eye is still more open, right? Because your third eye starts to calcify, around the age 4, 5, 6. And then by the time you're like, 8 or 9, we don't remember any of this stuff from the other side. So it's a really cool one. If you're interested in opening up your third eye, I definitely recommend it. I also have some free Starseed sticker printables below if you like stickers and you don't mind printing them. Really cool designs. I also recommend too, like, they're just fun to put as like backgrounds on like your phone or your computer, your tablet. So even if you don't plan on printing them, I think they're still just kind of fun, like digital designs to have as well. And then I also have all of my different sessions linked below too if you want to work with me one-on-one. If you are interested about your soul origins, your galactic origins, what planets you came from, what your soul energy is like, I have the soul origin and life purpose reading where we go into all of that and also talk about like, why are you here on the planet right now? Like, how are you here to help the collective? Because everyone is here to help the collective in some way or another right now. None of us don't have a soul mission, right? To help the collective, like during this time of ascension, right? And it could be big, it could be small, but every single person on this planet has a soul mission that's important. So if you want to know yours, I definitely recommend booking a reading with me in the link below. All right. So the next thing I want to talk about is a dream I had while I was at home for Thanksgiving. And so what was interesting, and it's not actually really a dream, I guess you could say, because I don't actually remember what I was dreaming about. All I can remember is what happened right before I woke up. Because right before I woke up, I had this remembrance of my identity outside of myself, right? Because right now we all have a human identity, right? We have our name, things like our gender, our age, our career, the things we like, the things we don't like, right? We have this whole identity of a person, right? But our soul has this identity that is so much bigger than that, right? That is a collection of this lifetime and every other lifetime we've had, and then just other identity type things that our soul has, like what star system we're from, and what color is our energy, and what does our energy kind of feel like? Is it more like galactic and magical, or is it earthy, or is it, does it feel like you're going into like an ice princess cave, or is it more like a dragon and it's fiery and it's hot? Like, our soul has this whole other identity other than just like who we are today, right? And when I was waking up from whatever dream I was having, because I don't remember the dream, I woke up, and as I was in that state between being asleep and being conscious, I remembered my identity of who I was. And I don't think it was my true like oversoul soul identity. It was this other version of me that was somewhere between my oversoul and who I am today. It felt like maybe the version of me that decided to become Judith Hope on Earth. That's what it felt like. And I remember it, and I felt it, and I was that person. And I was like, oh yeah, this is me. And I say person, probably more like an alien. And I was remembering it, and I was conscious enough, my brain was conscious enough to remember it. And then as I woke up, that part of me left, and I woke up as myself. And I was like, holy shit. Holy shit. What was that? And it was so cool, because I do believe that now more than ever, right now, where disclosure is happening and ascension is happening and people are waking up and realizing the truth, now more than ever we can tap into that version of ourselves that we really are. And this kind of just came through to me, just happened to me, but I invite you, if you're interested in this, if you think this sounds cool, set an intention to connect with that part of yourself that wanted to come on Earth and be the human that built the human that you are, right? I think that's the key. Like, who was it who am I? What part of me wanted to come and be a human on earth, and invite that to come through? Easiest way for that to come through is in your sleep, right? Because when you're sleeping, your astral body leaves your body, you go around, you do all this stuff, you're in your soul identity. And then as you're waking up, there's always that moment, right, between being fully asleep and being fully awake, where you're conscious enough to remember things coming through. But that's not the only way it can come through. It could also come through in a meditation. It could come through like doing breath work. It could come through when you're watching something and you just resonate with a certain, character on a TV show or a video game, or you see something online and it resonates with you, right? So there's multiple ways for this to come through. And yeah, if you're interested in this, I definitely invite you to send out that invitation to your higher self, to the other version of yourself, to allow this remembrance of who you are to start coming through. And I think, we have a lot of life, we got a lot of years on these earth lives and these bodies that we can allow this information to come through to us slowly. If we one day had this meditation and we were like, oh my God, like I'm this Arcturian being and I remember everything, like it might overwhelm our nervous system and our brain, right? But we allow it to kind of come through slowly. So we remember pieces of it. And that remembrance, it's that feeling of being the other person, right? It's that feeling of like, this is who I am. I remember now, right? We can allow that to come through slowly. So if anyone does that and has any experiences, please also drop a comment below. I would love to hear about it. All right, and then we've got one more thing that I wanted to talk about in today's podcast episode, and that was actually me leaving to get back on the road to go up to Seattle. Now, I left a few days ago, and while I had been home and in Texas with my family celebrating Thanksgiving, I actually had to go to the doctor and get an antibiotic for something not a very serious medical problem, but one that could become, not even really like serious, but like a big pain that I might have to like go to the ER or something if I didn't get an antibiotic for it, right? Basically like an infection type of thing, right? And so I remember I was going to leave early in the morning because I had to drive like 8 hours to get to my next location in West Texas, because I grew up in East Texas and that's where I was spending the holidays. And I remember the night before, I was like, to my spirit team, I was like, please help me remember my antibiotic, because I'm not something that's in my normal kind of list of things I have to take that I know I have to take, right? It's like, okay, like I'm on an antibiotic, so I have to remember it's like an extra, right? And so the next morning, I got up early. I was really efficient with packing. My dad helped me pack my car. I got like on the road on time, and I had like done all this like cleaning and reorganizing of my car before I set out. So I was like doing really well and remembering everything. And on the way to, like, I was leaving town, and on the way out of town, I kept thinking about like these examples of when people like have to, like, these synchronistic things that end up keeping people alive, right? Like if something hadn't happened, you would have been in a car wreck at this time, or a tree would have fallen you at this time, that type of thing. All these different example stories people have told me. And so I'm like thinking about this, and I'm driving. I'm about 30 minutes away from my parents' house on the way. And all of a sudden, I remember I didn't pack my antibiotic. I didn't even take my antibiotic this morning. Like, it just didn't even come into my mind, even though I had specifically asked my spirit team, my guides, to remind me to get my antibiotic. And I was like, oh my gosh, like now I've got to turn around. This is going to put me behind by an hour. Like, I had planned to stop and get food at Whataburger, like on my way out. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I was almost to the Whataburger. Like, now I'm going to have to go back, and I'm not going to be able to go to Whataburger. Like, it was this whole thing. I got so annoyed. But I was like, I have to get my antibiotic and I have to turn around. And so I did. I went home. I got my antibiotic. I took my antibiotic. I got back on the road. Put me behind by like an hour. I was super annoyed because I had been super efficient. I had got up on time. I had packed everything. I was going to be on the road. I was going to get to my location earlier before dark. And now it's like, no, now I'm going to get there like, and it's going to be dark outside. It's going to be a pain to find the Airbnb and all this kind of stuff. But it just kind of, was obvious to me at this point. Like, if I had, on my way leaving, I had all these kind of thoughts about people being delayed because it was going to, save their life and keep them from getting in some type of car crash or something like that, or some other incident. And then I had specifically asked my guides to remind me of something, and they didn't. And I did forget the antibiotics. I was like, it's obvious, like, I had to be delayed or something, or, maybe something could have happened, right? And I'll never know for sure. I don't need to know for sure, but it felt very, like, obvious to me. I was like, okay, like, if I had gotten on the road, if I had gone straight there, something could have happened, right? And so they had to kind of, like, protect me in that case, right? And I have these things happen to me where it's like I've had something where I like totally like missed my exit, and then like 10 minutes later I'm off in my mind. 10 minutes later, like almost out of body, right? I come back into my mind, I'm like, oh my gosh, I missed my exit, right? Like, and these things sometimes they happen, we think they're happening to us, and like, oh my gosh, I forgot this, I gotta go back and be an hour late, but sometimes they're happening for us. They're happening for our protection, our highest good. And these are extreme examples. But I think this happens in a lot of different situations, right? And I think a lot of people, especially like, I mean, when I was younger, I mean, even like 5 or 6 years ago, I was still in this mentality before my spiritual awakening that, oh my gosh, everything's against me and life sucks and the world's so hard and things never go right, kind of in that victim mentality. And now I look at it and be like, okay, if this happened, even though I asked my spirit guide team to remind me and I got that far without thinking about it, this had to happen for a reason, right? And it was actually happening to help me and keep me safe as opposed to be a pain in my butt, So I think it's all about perspective in that way. And I think the more you shift your frequency, which you do by healing wounds and looking at the dark aspects of yourself and accepting the dark aspects of yourself, right? And working through your own stuff, the higher your vibration gets. And the more you can look at life from a different perspective, right? So I ended up getting to my Airbnb that night, and I was able to find it, even though it was dark and it was difficult to find. It was cold. It got really cold, and I was also traveling north. And so but it was all fine. I had a great Airbnb. It was decorated super cute, super cozy. I got to go to Buc-ee's like 3 times that day. And everything ended up working out well, right? So it really was a very different way I would have handled that. Probably even 2 years ago, I would have handled it very differently, right? But I think things just get easier as we raise our vibration. And we could go into this whole thing about raising vibration, and you get to a point where you're looking at things as like neutral, right? Which is a good place to be in a lot of ways as a human, but it can also be a weird place to be as a human because you're kind of shifting out of some of your humanity as we know it, right? But I could probably do an entire episode over that, and I probably will at some point. But that is about all I had to talk about for my Thanksgiving. I'm currently in Denver, and I've had some interesting stuff happen to me in Denver as well. And so I'll be having that episode out pretty soon as well for you guys to learn about my experience in Denver. My experience in Denver. And then I'm going to be heading up to Wyoming tomorrow. And then I'm going to be heading up to Boise and then Portland. In Portland, I'm going to stay for more than one night. And then I'll be in Seattle. And then I'll be in Seattle, so I'll probably conclude this podcast at some point and then hopefully start like another podcast, which I'm super excited to do. So anyway, if you made it this far, thank you so much for listening. Like I said, if you want to work with me one-on-one, learn more about your soul origin, your life purpose, I have that reading linked below. I have a lot of other sessions as well too, different like quantum healing sessions, Akashic clearings. I even have like financial business stuff because I'm a CPA and I am an auditor as well. So I can also help you in that perspective. So please definitely take a look at my sessions, see if any of them you feel called to any of them. And then like I mentioned too, please check out those freebies below, the third eye activation meditation and then the Starseed sticker printables. So, all right. Thank you everyone so much for listening, and I will see you next time. Bye.